You think a horoscope is a message, something the universe wrote just for you and handed over for free in the back of a newspaper. You read it on the train. Mercury is in retrograde, so go easy on yourself today. It costs you nothing. It asks for nothing. It feels less like a purchase and more like a small gift from the sky. It isn't a gift, it's a product. One of the most quietly profitable products of the last 100 years, and the strangest thing about it is that the version you get for free is the same version that, one screen away, people pay real money for every single month. So here is the invoice you were never handed. Right now, in the United States alone, people spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion a year on astrology. And its cousins, the readings, the apps, the calls, the charts. $2 billion for guidance about a future nobody can actually see. And almost none of that money flows to the person reading the stars. That's the thing worth sitting with. Astrology is thousands of years old. The business of astrology, the machine that turns it into $2 billion, is barely a century old. Something changed. Not the belief, the delivery. Because that's what we're actually looking at here. Not a superstition, a market. And every market runs on a hunger, so name this one honestly. It's uncertainty. The gnawing, ordinary human need to know that tomorrow isn't random, that your life has a shape, and that shape has an author. Astrology sells you the author. It tells you that you are not an accident, that your worst traits are just so Scorpio, that the chaos has a chart. That is an enormous thing to sell. And for most of history, almost nobody could buy it. So, follow 3 threads as we go, because by the end, they explain the whole $2 billion. First, who astrology used to serve, and why that made it priceless but tiny. Second, the exact moment it stopped being handmade and started being manufactured. And third, the one that matters most, the question of who actually gets rich. Because it is almost never the person you picture when you picture an astrologer. Here's the shape of the answer. And I'll spend the rest of this video earning it. The reading was never the product. The delivery was. Keep that sentence somewhere. We're going to watch it come true 4 separate times, across 3,000 years, in 4 completely different technologies. And each time, the money lands in the same surprising place. If you like watching an invisible business get pulled into the light, you already know where the subscribe button is. Let's follow the money. Start at the beginning, because the beginning tells you what the product originally was. 3,000 years ago, in Mesopotamia, astrology had essentially one customer, the king. Court scholars sat up through the night watching the sky, and when a planet did something, they didn't write a column about it. They wrote a letter to the palace about the fate of the kingdom and the man who ran it. The system barely acknowledged that ordinary people even had futures worth charting. The heavens were a private hotline, and it rang in exactly one throne room. That model astrology as a bespoke, one-to-one service for the powerful held for an astonishingly long time. Jump forward to Elizabethan England, and Queen Elizabeth I keeps a personal astrologer, John Dee, a man so trusted she reportedly picked the very date of her coronation on his advice. One scholar. One monarch. A single reading, calculated by hand, for a single enormously important client. And you have to understand why that was the shape of it. Because the why is the whole story. A real astrological chart, done properly, is labor. You need the exact moment of birth, the exact place, the position of every visible body, and then hours of calculation to turn all that into a reading about one specific person. It doesn't scale. It physically can't. One astrologer, working flat out, can serve a handful of clients, so the only clients worth serving were the ones who could pay like a king, because often they were the king. That is a beautiful business in one narrow way, and a terrible one in every other. The margins per client are fantastic. The number of possible clients is almost 0. For 3,000 years, astrology is a luxury craft closer to a bespoke tailor than to anything you'd call an industry. And a bespoke tailor never makes $2 billion a year. To get there, somebody had to do something that, to a serious astrologer, looked almost like vandalism. Somebody had to take this intricate, individual, hand-calculated thing and figure out how to stamp out millions of identical copies. The reading had to stop being handmade. It had to become a commodity. The tool that did it wasn't a telescope. It was a printing press with a deadline. August 1930. A British newspaper, the Sunday Express, has a soft human story on its hands. A princess has just been born, Princess Margaret, and they want something charming to run alongside it. So they hire an astrologer named R.H. Naylor to write up the baby's stars. Nice little feature. Readers eat it up. So the paper asks for more. And this is the hinge of the entire history. So watch it closely. A one-off reading about one royal baby is still the old model bespoke. One subject, one chart. But a weekly column can't be about one person, because the whole point of a newspaper is that a million strangers all read the same page. Naylor is handed an impossible instruction. Write a personal reading for everyone at once. His solution built an industry. He stopped charting individuals and started charting categories, eventually landing on the 12 sun signs, the idea that everyone born in a given stretch of the year shares a single forecast. To a court astrologer, this is heresy. It throws away the birth time, the birthplace, nearly everything that made a chart specific. But it does something no astrology had ever done before. It turns an infinitely custom service into 12 mass-produced sentences that you can print once and sell to the entire country. That is the moment astrology becomes manufacturable. And notice who captured the value. Not Naylor, he earned a columnist's wage. The newspaper owned the column, the readers, and the ad revenue that a wildly popular feature pulls in. The reading was the bait. The circulation was the business. Other papers copied the format within months, because of course they did. You'd found free content that people bought the paper to read. The reading was never the product, the delivery was. Now the format is set, and for the next 90 years, the story is just the delivery, getting upgraded one technology at a time, and each upgrade finding a new way to charge you. Newspapers gave it away to sell papers. The next layer figured out how to bill for it directly. Fast forward to the 1990s and the pay-per-call boom, and astrology grows a meter. You've seen the late-night ads call this number the first bit's free. A friendly voice will read your stars. The most famous face of it was Miss Cleo, fronting a psychic hotline that ran on a very specific piece of arithmetic. The call, advertised as free, routed you to a line charging just under $5 a minute. And the operators on the phone had exactly one incentive: keep you talking. Let that land, because the numbers are stunning. Regulators later found that around 6 million people called and got charged. On average, about $60 each. Across 3 years, the operation billed on the order of $1 billion. The reading you dialed for was still just words about your future. What you were actually paying for, $5 at a time, was the meter, the minutes, the delivery pipe, the connection itself. Same pattern, new plumbing. And then the meter went into your pocket. The 2010s hand astrology its most efficient distribution machine ever built, the smartphone. Apps like CoStar arrive, wire a slick interface up to real astronomical data from NASA's own calculations, and push a notification to your phone every morning. The forecast is still free at the door. But now, the delivery isn't a newspaper you buy or a call you place. It's an app that lives with you, learns from you, and gently sells you the next tier: the premium reading, the compatibility check, the subscription. The scale is the tell. That US astrology app revenue jumped roughly 65% in a single year at the end of the 2010s, cracking $40 million. One app alone, Nebula, pulled in more than $7 million in a recent year. And CoStar, free to download, remember raised $15 million from venture capitalists in a single round, on its way to more than 20 million downloads. Investors don't write checks like that for a horoscope. They write them for a distribution network with millions of returning users. The reading was never the product. The delivery was. Which brings us to the question I promised at the start, the one that turns this whole story on its head. If astrology is a $2 billion market, who is actually catching the money? Picture the astrologer, the robed figure, the one with the charts and the knowing voice. It is almost irresistible to assume that as the industry got huge, she got rich. And here is the flip. Across 3,000 years, the person reading the stars has stayed, more or less, a wage worker. The court astrologer earned a courtier's keep. Nailer earned a columnist's salary. The voice on the psychic line earned by the hour, and often not much. The money, the real money, the margin never pooled around the reading. It pooled around whoever controlled the pipe the reading traveled through. Follow it back and it's the same face every time, just wearing new clothes. In 1930, the person who got rich wasn't the astrologer. It was the newspaper proprietor who owned the presses and the readership. In the 1990s, it wasn't Miss Cleo. She was a hired performer, a face on an ad. The money ran to the company that owned the phone system and the billing, skimming a cut of every single minute. And today, it isn't the astrologer either, it's the platform. And behind the platform, the venture fund that owns a slice of it, betting that 20 million people opening an app each morning is worth far more than any forecast printed inside it. And if you want the proof that the reading itself was never where the wealth lived, look at the one place the old bespoke model survived, right at the top. In the 1980s, it came out that for 7 years, decisions inside the Reagan White House were quietly timed around astrology. Nancy Reagan kept a personal astrologer, Joan Quigley, consulted for pay nearly every day, and the planets were checked before the president flew, before he debated, even around the timing of summits with the Soviets. This is astrology at its most exclusive and most powerful. A single reader, a single family, the most important client on Earth. And notice, even that didn't build an empire. It was the old Babylonian model in a Washington phone call. One astrologer, one powerful client, a good living, and not a penny more. Bespoke astrology, no matter how elite the customer, tops out at a salary. It never becomes an industry, because a business that serves one person at a time can only ever be that big. The $2 billion didn't come from serving kings better. It came from giving up on kings entirely and selling the cheap, standardized 12-box version to everyone at once. Reach beat depth. It always does. So if the machine is this good, what threatens it? A few things, and here I have to be honest about the ground we're standing on. The first threat is the oldest one. It can be checked. When researchers have run careful tests of astrology's specific, falsifiable claims, those claims generally haven't held up. That's the settled part, and I won't pretend otherwise. But notice how little that has mattered to the business. Because the mass market product was never really selling verified prediction. It was selling the feeling of being understood. And you can't run a controlled trial on comfort. Here's where I'll resist an easy cheap shot though, because there's a real distinction the "it's all nonsense" version flattens. Serious astrologers, the ones who actually do the hours of chart math, have spent a century wincing at the sun sign horoscope. To them, the newspaper column isn't astrology. It's a cartoon of it, the 12-box version that threw away everything specific. And they have a point. The thing most people mean by astrology, the app blurb, the typical Gemini, is precisely the mass-produced commodity, not the ancient craft. So the honest framing isn't astrology fooled everyone. It's that a rich, complicated old tradition got compressed into a product simple enough to sell at scale. And it's the product, not the tradition, that became big business. The sharper threat to the machine is regulation, and the money curdling into fraud. That psychic hotline empire didn't just fade. It was hauled in front of federal regulators, forced to forgive around $500 million in charges and pay a fine, precisely because your first minutes are free, turned out to be a trapdoor over a $5 a minute meter. When the delivery pipe gets too greedy, the state notices. And the quietest threat is the one every app now lives under: churn. A newspaper column had you for the price of a paper you were buying anyway. A subscription has to earn your renewal every month forever against the exact moment you glance at the charge and think, wait, why am I paying for this? The whole modern industry is a race to feel essential before you feel billed. So tally it up honestly, because a market this size always has a ledger with two columns. In the winners column, the distributors. Every time. The publisher who owned the press. The company that owned the phone line. And today, the platform and the venture fund. The people who understood that in astrology, as in almost everything, you don't get rich making the thing. You get rich owning the road the thing travels on. A quarter of young women in America have reportedly opened one of these apps. That's not a readership. That's an audience you can rent to advertisers and upsell forever. And in the other column, the one the wry version of this story would rather skip, are the people the meter was built to catch. Go back to those 6 million hotline callers for a second and drop the irony, because it doesn't belong here. A lot of them weren't fools looking for entertainment. They were lonely, or frightened, or up at 2 a.m. with a decision they couldn't face alone, and they called a number that promised a free, kind voice. Then the bill came $60, on average, sometimes far more, charged to people who often had at least to spare. That is the sharp edge under the whole soft business. The comfort was real, so was the invoice. That's the tension the industry lives inside, and it's worth naming plainly. The need astrology answers is genuine and human, and not remotely stupid. The machinery built to monetize that need is, at its worst, a meter pointed straight at the anxious. Both of those are true at once, and any honest account has to hold them together. So here's where we land. The comfort is real. The desire to believe your life has a shape and an author is one of the most human things there is, and no market can make that fake. But the $2 billion machine wrapped around that comfort is not ancient wisdom and not the sky. It's a distribution business, and it has followed one rule, unbroken, from a Babylonian palace to the phone in your hand. The reading was never the product. The delivery was. The king paid for a scholar. You pay for an app. In between, the only thing that ever really got sold was the pipe, and the genius of the whole trade was making the pipe feel like a gift. Next time, we take that exact same lens and point it at something that looks even less like a business and turns out to be one of the most profitable ever run. But that's a story for another chart.